Okay, so you've just been inspired to write an exciting, brand new campaign for your playgroup, but you're struggling to actually craft the narrative. Don't worry, we got you covered. This is Demystifying D&D. Hey, I'm Ricardo Boyd-Diaz, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how you can use the writing conventions of contemporary story structure to help you craft and run that D&D campaign that you've been dying to try out. But before I do that, please like and subscribe for more tasty D&D content. Now, it might seem weird at first to talk about story structure through the lens of a game where, unlike a screenplay or novel, player characters can make basically any decision they want. Won't it feel like they're on rails if we give them too much structure? And yes, sometimes that can be the case, but D&D is a collaborative storytelling game, and your players are going to want to latch on to strong story concepts. Using some of these techniques for crafting story structure, you will be able to build strong foundations for your adventures, be able to react to your players' spontaneous decisions, and still make it work for your overall story.
Wow, great reflexes.
If you have a roadmap, it's easier to take detours without getting lost.
Come on, Tulio. We'll follow that trail.
What trail?
The trail that we blaze. That trail that we blaze.
See.
The three-act structure is one of the most traditional and common narrative structures used today, dating all the way back to the 4th century. In the three-act structure, a story is divided into 3 distinct sections: Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. Maybe I didn't quite have to explain that, but each section is used to a different narrative effect. Act 1 is known as the setup. This is where the audience is going to get all the relevant information that they need to understand the story, or also known as exposition. So this is the setting, we meet the characters, and we learn how the world of this narrative functions. In D&D, this is that very first moment where your characters enter the world, or sometimes you can even do this in a session 0. Act 2 is called the Confrontation. Characters are attempting to solve an issue that arose in Act 1. They are confronting the problem. However, they don't have the necessary skills or abilities to accomplish the goal yet. The third and final act is known as the Resolution. This is when the story and all the subplots culminate together, climaxing into the most intense conflict of the story with an outcome that does resolve the story, whether that's good or bad. Many screenwriters and writing gurus have their own takes on the three-act structure, further breaking it down into specific plot points within each act. For this video, I'm going to be using Blake Snyder's Save the Cat as a reference because that's the one I'm most familiar with. But if you guys enjoyed this video, perhaps we'll do breakdowns on some of the other ones as well. So then let's talk about how Blake Snyder breaks down the three-act structure. In his book Save the Cat, screenwriter Blake Snyder posits that there are 15 essential story beats that every story needs to function properly. This is Blake Snyder's beat sheet. Within it, he's broken down each act into smaller, more specific story beats. This beat sheet can be a great tool for helping you lay out when you might want certain narrative events to occur. I'm going to use Blake Snyder's beat sheet as a guide for the rest of this video. I'll be sure to define any terms I use along the way. However, before we write anything, there's something we have to think about first. The very first thing you should do is establish where your story starts and where it ends. Stories are journeys of change. Emotionally speaking, your story should end in a different place than where it began. For example, at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, we meet Frodo and his friends living a happy, carefree life in the Shire. But by the end of the story, Merry and Pippin have been kidnapped and Frodo and Sam have set off on their own, bearing the weight of the world on their shoulders. Spoiler alert for the Fellowship of the Ring if you haven't seen it yet, I guess. Knowing where you want your story to begin and end before you start writing it can be a great way to help you plan out future plot points because you're going to know what you're building towards. This will also help you adjust to what your players decide to do. Since you know the final destination, you'll know how to get them back on track. The purpose of the first act is to establish the world of the story, the tone and point of view of that world, and the themes that we're going to explore. Collectively, this is known as the setup. So we're putting all the pieces of the story in place before the events of the story come knocking them all down.
I'm slamming him tonight. You guys are dead in the water.
All right, way to go, Donnie!
Blake Snyder calls this the thesis world. It's the everyday world that the characters have come to know. There are 3 things to establish in your setup: setting, tone, and point of view. Setting is simply where and when we are. Are we in Barovia after the events of Curse of Strahd, or are we in the American South during the Civil War? Tone is the general vibe of the story that you're trying to tell. Every world has an inherent feel to it. Is it drab and serious, or is it light and comedic? Or is it drab and comedic? It's important for your players to know the tone so they know what kind of world that they are playing in. But let's be honest, there's gonna be goofs no matter what. It's D&D after all. They're gonna be goofing. Point of view is whose perspective are we seeing the world from. Choosing your point of view can help you establish what your tone is, because within any world there's going to be varying tones depending on whose eyes we're looking through. For example, your players may be playing experienced warrior generals of a powerful army, or they could be playing the squires of those very same generals. One of those stories, the former, may be a gritty war epic, where the latter is a more light, comedic, coming-of-age story of those squires becoming war heroes themselves. The next step of your first act is to completely destroy everything that you spent the time setting up with the catalyst. The catalyst is the big event that completely shakes the world of the characters. It turns their world upside down. Sometimes this is also called the call to action. So this is the townsperson bursting into the tavern shouting that the village is under attack, or the discovery that Santa has been kidnapped hours before his takeoff. Whatever this event is, it needs to rock the world of the characters enough to motivate them to take action. In D&D terms, this is typically known as the story or plot hook. After your big catalyst, there's a natural moment that occurs in stories that Blake Snyder calls the debate. This is that moment where characters are deciding what to do about this big thing that just happened, or even that they should do anything at all. Are they the right person for the job? Should they answer the call or not? This is too crazy for us. We can't do this.
Calm down. Get a hold of yourself.
Stewardess, please let me handle this.
Calm
Calm down now, get back to your seat.
There are any number of ways that your players may respond to your catalyst, and this is where you may need some flexibility as a DM. Allow space for your players' creativity and problem solving, but offer them some options if they need them. You hear the band of marauders wreaking havoc on the quiet village outside. Hand on your hilt, out of the corner of your eye, you see the back door of the tavern slightly ajar. What do? You can offer them a couple of options: fight or run. They don't have to take those options, but it's nice to have them if they're stuck. However, the rippling effect of this big event is going to remain regardless. The final purpose of your first act is to state your theme. What is your story about? Is it about overcoming your deepest, darkest fears, or is it about the moral complexities of a capitalistic society? Underneath your plot or the events of your story, there is a deeper meaning. That is your theme. I could do a whole video about theme, but for now, I think we're going to continue our discussion of story structure by breaking into Act 2. Because your first act catalyst flipped the world upside down, Snyder calls the second act the antithesis world, which means it's the opposite of what the world was before. So the second act is dedicated to the meat of your story, and it's usually the longest section. This is where you really get to throw obstacles and challenges at your players, and you have so much freedom to play. So Blake Snyder calls the first half of the second act the fun and games, because this is where you get to go ham. This is all about them having to figure out how to solve the problem that you set up for them in the first act. But don't forget to make your obstacles and challenges relating to your thematic through line. This is also the time where you can introduce subplots and smaller story arcs that seem unrelated to the larger picture, but end up tying in somehow. The exact middle of your story is known as your midpoint, and the midpoint is meant to represent a change in the narrative direction of your story. For example, in a mystery, the players may uncover a vital piece of information that completely recontextualizes the narrative to that point. Or maybe the players are meant to go find a powerful artifact, and when they finally find it, it's actually a fake. Or maybe they were sent to kill an evil warlord, and they succeed. But what they don't know is that that is leaving space for his even more vicious brother to ascend to power. The midpoint is the place where your story turns into a new direction. Following the midpoint, things start to typically ramp up. The world starts to collapse in around the players, whether they realize it or not. Maybe that vital piece of information they found starts to form a rift in the party where they don't really agree on what to do next. Or maybe they start to distrust each other. Or perhaps that warlord is starting to plot his retaliation for killing his brother. So whether the players realize it or not, the situation's getting worse and worse for them. Blake Snyder calls this the bad guys close in. At this point in the story, your players may experience a profound loss or defeat. Maybe an NPC that they love was killed, or maybe they return to the village to find that it's been burned down in their absence. Their decisions and actions have resulted in something very bad happening.
You shall not pass! Fly, you fools!
This is known as the all is lost moment. It's meant to be the lowest point for your characters in the story. It is meant to be the biggest obstacle to overcome with the least amount of hope. A good all is lost moment is meant to create a sense of catharsis as your players overcome this moment, being able to rally and come out on top in the end. Having learned from their trials and failures, your players face the big bad in the finale. This is the synthesis world where everything comes together for the final showdown. The players take the lessons that they've learned along the way and they overcome and win. It won't be easy, but it will be a blast. Of course, I want to acknowledge that a D&D campaign is not a screenplay or novel. Some of these plot points that you plan out aren't going to play out that way, nor should they. If you're forcing specific events to happen regardless of what your players do or what the dice dictate, then you're not really playing D&D at that point. D&D isn't meant to create the best version of a story. It's to tell the story together. So your players may ruin your all is lost moment by rescuing that NPC in the very nick of time, or they may go back and just completely decimate that villain before he's able to regroup. That's okay. Ruining the plans of the DM is half the fun of D&D for most people. However, by building a strong story structure, you'll more easily be able to adjust to what your players do on the fly, because you'll have a strong skeleton to support your improvised problem solving. If you're interested in learning how to tell better stories, there are tons of amazing resources out there for you. Some that I have found particularly helpful are Story by Robert McKee, The Anatomy of Story by John Truby, and The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. I can't recommend these books enough. Whether you're a screenwriter, a novelist, or a dungeon master, the traditions of storytelling are universal, and you can learn a lot through studying different writing disciplines. That's all I have for you today regarding story structure. Please let us know in the comments if you found this video helpful and would like us to do a part 2 with story structure using other source materials as guides, or any other topic you'd like us to demystify in the future. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe so you know when our next bit of great D&D content hits the web. Also, be sure to follow us on all of our social medias for more D&D tips and tricks, and subscribe to twitch.tv/characterplayer for some live play. And remember, no guts, no story.